Nick says FOMC statement gets a big rewrite. Tightening bias gone, which is exactly what we predicted last night. Nick says, but in a way that says a cut isn't necessarily imminent, which is in line with what Steven said. So I would give half a point to each one. So somewhere between me and Steven is where the Fed lies right now. Lumi, go ahead.
Yeah, so I had like one question with two parts. With the Fed meeting today, I think they deferred their interest rate cuts, and how do you see that affecting the overall market and Tesla? And do you think a 2% inflation rate is even possible?
Thanks, Lumi. I do think 2% inflation is obviously possible, yes. That's the second part of the question. The first part, um, I think that the market will have to adjust their expectations, like we said last night. And, obviously, all else equal, higher rates aren't good for risk assets. And that's what the market is reflecting today. But, Tesla has a lot going for it in terms of micro. So I don't think Tesla will be impacted as much as some other stocks. Um, Tesla also, most importantly, Tesla has a very strong balance sheet. I mean, we have $30 billion of cash on hand, earning lots of interest income, and no recourse debt. So, you'd see. I don't know if you heard what I said earlier, but you know, I was expecting rate cuts obviously earlier than you did, and Powell um, took March off the table practically. He said he doesn't expect March to be the one where they cut. But at the same time, if I remember correctly, you were expecting him to leave the door open for more rate hikes, and he took that off the table as well.
I thought that was a fantastic press conference. I think what he really wanted was some optionality for data in the next 6 weeks, and I think he got that. And I think he signaled the way he communicated that he thinks we're at the peak of the cycle. I think was honestly probably pretty good. Like after I spent some time listening to it today and thinking about what I'd said yesterday, I think Powell's right to communicate that. He kind of did it in a balanced approach. He said, um, "I think that we've probably reached the peak rates in this rate hike cycle." But then I thought it was kind of weird for him to bury the lead 30 minutes or 40 minutes into the press conference by saying we don't think a March cut is the base case at this scenario. But I thought it was a pretty balanced press conference. He seemed a lot less mission accomplished type vibes that he did in the December press conference. So that was really in line with expectations, I'd say today.
Yeah.
Would you
Good.
what were your thoughts on it? Those are mine.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I were very close to each other going into it, and I think he came out, um, in between us. So I think all three of us are pretty much in line right now. But I'll add an asterisk to it, which is I think that they're making a mistake. I think that they should cut earlier, but I don't think they will.
I thought he brought up a good point about how um, this once you start cutting, that's the first cut is probably more consequential than the second one. The second cut would be, and so I think he's kind of just trying to be very careful that once he kind of starts the cut cycle, it's not like he's probably it'd look really bad to their credibility if 3 months later they raise rates again. So I think he just wants to have a little bit more data. And while 6 months of data is good, um, waiting another 6 weeks before you decide to cut or not, I think is a smart move. especially if we look at growth in the economy. I think he's realized that with how strong the labor market's been and how strong growth has been, I think that grants him a little bit more optionality. So it kind of helps seal the case that no, we're not going to see a reacceleration of inflation. But I think he's realized that if the labor market's going to continue to stay strong and if growth throughout the economy is going to stay strong, then I can ensure that, and this is me speaking for Powell, we can get down to 2% and that we don't actually level off at 3% or something like that. And I think that's kind of what he's maybe slightly concerned with when he talks about risk.
Right. Exactly. I pinned at the top my list of statements that I thought the Powell was going to say from macro analyst. Labor market. Would you agree with all of these statements were said? You'd see while you looked that through. Machine, what were your takes?
I didn't hear the first 10 minutes or so, but what I heard after that was overall, I thought pretty even. There were some statements that were a bit hawkish versus market expectations. I'm sure you've already said this. Obviously, the fact that they already stating that they're not expecting a rate cut in March was maybe a little surprising that they would state that. I don't know if they've done that in previous meetings. There were things about obviously talking about the strength of the economy and employment, all would be pointing to signs of being a bit more hawkish. But then there were also dovish statements, such as there being no fear that, or a little fear that, like inflation, the reduction in inflation is transitory. And in addition to that, I just think overall that they're confident kind of in their trajectory. They just want to wait for more data on that. So, and not relying on, for instance, housing, which I think is good, as I talked about the other day. I think they're just very steady. They're like, everything's working as planned. And the one thing that he stated, which I hadn't considered before, which I think is a good point, is the strength of the labor market or the economy is partly due to the previous supply restrictions coming undone, and those effects will eventually go away. So that would also cause a bit more slowing. So the point I had made before about everything's going great, the economy is great, part of that is because of that supply restriction and relaxation again, and them acknowledging that that is going to go away at some point is more dovish, in my opinion, than I was thinking. And I think that actually makes sense. I missed that point. So I think overall it's pretty neutral. The market was expecting, a few weeks ago, the market was expecting a lot of rate cuts, and we saw that with the overall market going up. We saw that especially in interest rate sensitive companies like Tesla or Enphase really go up, but then they corrected in the last few weeks, partly because people realized that those expectations were too optimistic. So now I don't see huge moves happening to the downside because I think there's already been some of the expectations gone away.
Okay. You'd see, what do you think about those predictions at the top?
Yeah, the ones that what will he say today? I think that's. I mean, he says that almost every meeting. Those look like it. They're true.
Okay. So, machine, how do you think this is going to impact Tesla stock price in the coming weeks? Let's say that they don't pull the trigger in March. Let's say that they wait until May. And I'm looking at the probabilities by the FedWatch tool. According to FedWatch tool, the probability of a rate cut in March is, wow, still it's showing 40% probability of a rate cut. There's no fucking way that's gonna happen. After what he said. And then so it's looking more like May now. It looks like this hasn't adjusted yet. I'm not sure why. So how do you think? Let's say they wait until the summer and for a rate cut. And my base case right now, according to macro analyst at the top of your screens, my hypothesis that I'm trying to disprove is we have Goldilocks in our hands, but if the Fed doesn't cut rates by Q2, so end of Q2, recession could start by the end of 2024. What do you think about that machine and that you'd see?
Well, your question switched there. First, you're asking about Tesla stock price, and now you're asking about
Just to give two answers. Can you keep two questions in mind?
So I think, like I just said, I think a lot of that expectation about the rate hikes, rate cuts coming sooner, have lessened, and that's part of the reason why in the last 3 weeks or so, all the EV stocks, including Tesla, have gone corrected down significantly. I think that's a big part of it. So I think they kind of already have priced in a lot of that. Maybe not 100%, so they may drift lower on the more certainty that there's not going to be anything in March. But otherwise, I think there's been such a sell-off that I don't think, unless macro tanks, like I don't think that there's going to be a lot. It's going to drop a lot more from where it is. So I think ultimately, probably in a few months, it'll be a bit higher, or at some point in the few months, it'll be higher. And then in terms of the chance of recession, I'm not as on top of as you are in terms of all these numbers on the economy's strength and employment. I mean, I do tend to
Okay, so
think.
you don't
Yeah,
know. Just
I don't.
it's
I
okay
don't
to
know.
say I don't
I
know.
don't know.
Okay, that's
I
fine.
don't know.
So we're gonna spend 5 or 10 more minutes, minimum 5, 10, maximum 10 more minutes on this macro, and then I'm going to bring up Omar, and then we're going to switch to compensation discussion. You'd see, what do you think about that question? My base case, according to macro analysts at the top, hypothesis Goldilocks, but if the Fed doesn't cut rates by the end of Q2, recession could start by the end of 2024.
Machine's kind of like Jay Powell, where if you ask him more than one question, he has to frantically pull out his pencil and start writing down what you said because he has an attention span of a gnat. But to answer your first question, what I think will happen with Tesla stock price, I don't think I agree with Machine that I think most of it's priced in. That I think the market's kind of front run a little bit. That the rates aren't going to necessarily come down quickly. And I think back to 2021 or 2022 when they started raising rates, a quarter point move in either direction isn't going to necessarily move markets a lot.
I think, so hold on. Okay, I got to interrupt right there because you guys agreed on something and I disagree with you on that. I don't think markets priced in no rate cuts until this end of summer or until the summer. If it was priced in, we would have seen it in the probabilities of the Fed Watch tool.
Yeah, well, they were. I mean, that in the last couple weeks, they've moved from like 80 or 90% cut in rate
I mean,
in
it's
March
yeah, but
to
okay,
40%.
but I'm looking at it right now, and we're post the meeting, and it's still showing 40% probability of a cut by March. So it's clearly not priced in. Machine.
Well, you make a good point. Partially, what I've noticed in the last year and a half, is that those changes in the FOMC probabilities don't always directly align with market corrections, especially in specific stocks. So I think the fact that it went from a very high probability down to 40%, and that was in line with the correction, a lot of these interest rate sensitive stocks, that part makes sense. But it could make sense that even though it's going to correct down from 40% down to zero, that doesn't mean that stocks are going to have to correct further. That's just not. It doesn't. It's not always one-to-one correlation temporally.
You'd see final words, and now we're going to ask one question: probability of a recession, and now we're going to switch to compensation. You'd see.
So in February, they're going to announce some revisions to CPI. So I think the reason that the March probability should stay actually somewhat elevated is because there's a lot of data that's going to come out in the next 6 weeks. And just because it's not the base case doesn't mean that there's not a decent chance that it doesn't happen. So maybe the base case is 60% chance that they plan to not cut in March, but that still leaves a 40% chance of a cut happening. So maybe let's say in February, some of the CPI data gets revised down. I think that would make a clear path to cuts in March. So I think honestly, I'd probably price that If it was me, 25% or so chance of the cut, maybe 30%. And to
Okay,
answer the second question, I'd say like a 10% chance of a recession this year.
okay. UHC says 10% probability of a recession start this year. Machine, what's yours?
11%.
Okay, so we're on the same page. I would guess about 20% simply because of the rhetoric. He doesn't seem cognizant, I think, of the fact that the real interest rates are high, or he doesn't seem too concerned about it. So I'm concerned about that. But I think it's less likely than not. I think it's less likely than 50% that the recession will start this year. But I'm going to monitor what happens in the next meeting or two. So my base case is still we have Goldilocks unless they hold these rates too high, too long. In my book, that means end of Q2. Okay, Omar. Okay, sorry, Machine.
So let's say the March is off the table, but there's still May before the summer, right? So you're right now the assumption is we made a bet, didn't we, on March?
I have a bet with UHC. I don't know about you, and you're still eating again. So I'm going to move you down. You're done.
I'm not eating.
Bullshit. So you're not going to have a say in the whole conversation because of your nonsense. Omar, any question on any comments on macro before we switch to compensation?
Not really. I mean, it sounds like everyone's in agreement. Rates are coming down. It's just when. And, that's kind of what they were talking about at the meeting. They said, all right, when are we going to be confident? They're always a little bit more reserved than they probably are really thinking. They said, we don't really think this is happening, but we're leaving the door open to exploring it. So, I mean, generally, this is a pretty good scenario. Out of all the possible scenarios, this could have played out. Hyperinflation being one, a very soft landing being another. We, really landed in a pretty rosy zone, I think. So sounds like we're going to get maybe about 3 rate cuts this year, and it's going to be great. Financing costs are going to come down. Money's going to flow into growth equities away from bonds and savings accounts. So it'll be a lot of fun later this year.
All right. Okay, we're done with macro conversation. Congratulations, everybody. We made it. We made it. 20 minutes. All right. So obviously, let's switch to compensation. UC, do you want to be part of this conversation, or do you want to stick to macro for your part? Okay. There's a lot going on X. A lot of people are saying their pieces, publishing posts, videos. Omar, did you get a chance to catch up on all that? What are your thoughts after sleeping over it?
Well, I think it's probably going to be fine. It really is probably mostly noise. They probably won't impact things too much. I don't think Elon is going to leave Tesla over it. And the judge didn't say, for example, that you can't pay someone in options or something like that. They just said that were the shareholders properly informed that the director setting his compensation weren't sufficiently independent in the opinion of the court. So all they theoretically have to do is just put appropriate disclosures, have the plan go to a vote again, and people could approve it. It was approved overwhelmingly last time. I mean, generally, it's very sort of, there's a high burden on public company board of directors to prove that their compensation was fair, that they're setting compensation appropriately, and they have to do all kinds of things. They have to evaluate what the peers are paying and this and that, and like there's a lot of sort of legalese to it. So it may be potentially difficult to get the same type of thing through that process. Um, but we'll have to see what happens. I think this is really, obviously Musk saw this coming, and he's basically beginning to lay the theoretical, sort of framework for why this is justified, right? Because if he's saying like, okay, I'm not comfortable building Tesla into an AI and robotics leader until I have control, then you've got, some of these things to the point of the judge saying, oh, he's never going to leave Tesla. But I don't really agree with that. Everyone kind of thought that he was going to leave after the Model 3, which is really the juncture where we really needed him the most after the Model 3, ramping that up,
Right.
doing the Model Y. So I think the company could have had a very different trajectory if he had stuck to his plan. And this plan was supposed to incentivize him to stay. He did stay. Tesla ended up being very successful, but now they're sort of rescinding it. So I think he's kind of trying to lay the groundwork for a justification that will allow the compensation committee to say they did their job correctly. But we'll really have to see what becomes of this and any potential further compensation plan.
Okay. Meta and then machine.
Yeah, I think one of the questions I have about this is even if they were to approve a new plan, what sucks is like the way ISOs work, Elon would end up having to pay even more taxes, which would actually hurt shareholders even more. Because if I understand correctly, like, there's a certain amount of shares that he receives at the original share price, and now he would receive them at much higher levels. So for him to be compensated, they'd have to give him even more. So it just doesn't seem fair that they can retroactively change this. And I was wondering if anybody knows how long ago was this case filed? Was it after or before the last milestones were achieved?
I thought I heard from someone, I don't know if it's correct, that this lawsuit was filed like right after the compensation package was approved. So way back in, I guess, 2018.
I don't think they necessarily need to change the strike price of the options. Those have already been sort of apportioned. So they may just need to get it sort of reapproved. I'm not a legal expert, but I don't think it necessarily changes sort of the underlying options contract necessarily.
Omar, is there a way for you to do the voice isolation mic mode, please? Meta?
Yeah, I think there is precedence actually around this. When Steve Jobs rejoined Apple, they tried to reinstate his previous options at a strike price that he used to have, and the government took issue with that because it changes how much taxes they get to collect.
Yeah, I mean, that was a little bit of a different scenario. Um, you know, there hasn't been any sort of change in tenure, him leaving the company or joining the company or anything like that. The options have already been sort of allocated. The only thing they really have to do is sort of grant them to him. It's not a backdating like what happened with Apple, where they were taking options and then backdating them. These actually, were issued at that time.
I mean, somebody who's got more accounting expertise can answer this more clearly, but from my understanding of the way ISOs work, there's like a cap as to how many ISOs you can issue each individual. And I think it's $100,000 per year. And the cap applies to the stock price at the time of issuance. So that, and then the thing about ISOs as opposed to qualified stock options is if you hold on to them for 2 years after exercise, which Elon would obviously do, then you only pay taxes, I think, on the strike price. So there's a huge like tax incentive to have ISOs versus qualified stock options. And the part of the rules with ISOs is you have to, the strike price has to be at the day that they were issued. So if you issue them now, you can't lower the strike
Well,
price.
incentive stock options have a limit, right? You can't
Yeah,
do 55 billion in incentive stock options.
no, that is correct. But of the shares he received before it 10x, each of those would have been capped at 100K a year. So that's about 1 million a year in options, and who knows, how much that actually ends up translating into. It could have been billions. I haven't run the math on that. If Yaman, if you want to do that, that might be make for a nice Patreon post to figure out the tax implications of this.
Yeah, sorry, it's not my expertise area here, and these things change all the time. So that's not. But I honestly, I don't think this is the important part of the conversation anyway.
The reason why I bring it up is because it means that in order to compensate Elon the same amount, it would cost the company more. So in effect, it's actually hurting the shareholders.
Okay, we're switching gears. Is Elon less or more likely to leave the company today versus last month? Machine?
I haven't thought through that all the way, but I would think less likely. I think because I think this has already been expected and on their side, which is why he was tweeting about compensation a week ago. And I think he's looking forward to what his next compensation plan will be, which might try to recuperate some of that lost shares or not. And I think Tesla's going to give it to him. And so I think that's something that's always needed with any employee of a company, to probably incentivize them to want to work there. And the fact that he's already talking about it means, it's on his mind and he wants to stay. And he's posting Optimus videos same day, last week and this week, and yesterday. I think it's all signaling, moving forward, this is where he wants to be. Just give him, his incentives, which are nothing. There's nothing absurd here. Not that anyone's questioning this right now, but giving a CEO a compensation plan is the same as giving any employee a compensation plan. And when your stock vests, whether you bought ownership like him to start with, or you're an employee, and after 4 years your options vest, that's for the work that you did for those 4 years. That's not to say keep working for us on maybe a somewhat lower salary, and just expect those options to inflate, and that's what you're going to be worth. No, people get more options. They get more money in some way or form. That's normal, and so it's normal for a CEO too.
Meta, do you agree with what Machine said?
That's not entirely always the case. It's very exceptional, but there have been CEOs that went a different route, like Steve Jobs, I believe, famously, and he took $1 salary, and then the rest was equity. I don't remember if he was getting more equity or not. And then there was similar things with the founders of Google, but they structured it so that they had control, and if they sold their shares, there was a severe penalty. I don't know what Bezos did. So there have been others that have done different things, but I think the key difference is each of them had way more equity in the company to begin with. So they didn't have to like exercise shares and then pay taxes on it and acquire the shares. They were just, they just started out with those shares when the company's worth very, very little. There's a famous process called buy, borrow, die. And I think those folks made so much money that the buy, borrow, die incentive was much higher for them.
Interesting.
Are you familiar with the buy, borrow, die thing? Or
Yeah, I am. Yes. All
it's
right,
kind of
we're
like
gonna.
Elon's being punished because he wanted to work for it and align his incentives, as opposed to just, on the onset, keep more shares at the IPO.
So, how do you think it's gonna play out from here on out?
I think there'll be a new compensation plan, or this will get appealed. I hope they appeal it, because the precedent this sets is really bad, and so I can't see this actually being the precedent going forward, or nobody will want to work out of Delaware at the very least. So this sets a terrible precedent where you shareholder votes can be overturned. If anything, I think the court should say, okay, fix the language and then, issue a new vote, but they should have processed this in much faster than 6 years. So because of the delay and because of all the other effects, I think it doesn't make any sense that this wouldn't get overturned. So I think they'll appeal it for sure, but that could prolong the process. So now that they know what the nuances are, they could probably try to pass a new uh, compensation plan. But I suspect Elon tries to reincorporate in another state first, then do it that way. So I think it's going to be drawn out in a long time before Elon gets another compensation plan on the board.
Okay. What do you think is the probability of Tesla reincorporating in Texas?
I don't know. It sounds like he's talking about Nevada and Texas at the moment. I've heard Wyoming is a good place as well. I just don't know the details.
Yeah, I don't know the details either. I don't know what's involved. What would Tesla be giving? I mean, obviously, there's a reason why corporations incorporate in Delaware. So whatever that reason is, they're giving that away, right?
Yeah, historically, the funny part is you hear that Delaware courts are very kind towards corporations, and they have a large body of legal work to lean on that allows corporations to defend themselves by quoting precedent. And I have seen, like, some other folks have posted, a lot of folks have basically said there's zero precedent for this ever happening before in Delaware. So this is actually a really big deal in that, like, from a legal perspective. Like, there's never been another compensation plan that's ever been rescinded.
Well, there's also never been a compensation this big, right?
The size shouldn't be the point of the matter, but arguably, yeah, you could say that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not obviously, but there are a lot of things that's a first about this situation. So I'm not surprised that it's the first time. So do you think anything will change with the board?
With the board itself, I
Yeah,
I doubt it. I think it's more likely they reincorporate in a different state than forcing them to operate differently.
gotcha. So you're convinced that if Tesla reincorporates in Texas or Nevada, and we have the same exact compensation structure for Elon next going forward, next 5 years, 10 years, what have you, then it won't be a problem. It's only a Delaware issue.
I believe so.
Okay, gotcha.
This is a personal opinion. I'm not a lawyer.
Right, right. I don't think we have any lawyers in here. And I know people are, requesting to speak, but this is a very sensitive topic. Third rail of investing in Tesla, Elon's compensation. And the speakers are set. So interesting.
But what I will say is the ruling did come down in the way Andrea James thought it would, in terms of it had to do with disclosures. So it's going to be so silly if it just came down to, like, they didn't like the way the thing was advertised. But then, there's like that link, the video from Squawk Box and various other ones that show clearly people understood what the plan was from a monetary perspective. So the fact that the shareholders voted on it, and I would argue knew what it meant, seems to be the bigger issue than who put the proposal up.
Let me ask you this. So when Andrea James said that, um, I didn't realize the decision came as she predicted. Um, when did she predict that?
She predicted that when Elon asked about wanting to be compensated fairly. Remember, there was a
Okay,
I think
so
it's
like couple,
G10.
just two
Yeah,
2 weeks ago or so.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so
She
it's
was
not
also
like
the first to point out that,
it's not like 5 years ago
well, I think she might have known about
when
it.
the compensation structure was being debated in early 2018. Not many people um, warned, right?
Yeah, I don't remember, and of course I don't know everything that happened at that time, but in following her pretty closely, I don't remember her ever saying that that was an issue at the time.
Yeah,
I also don't think she's saying she agrees with it, by the way. I think she was just summarizing what the case was.
that's that's kind of besides the point. It's the irrelevant. I was going to ask you something. Oh, did you think that we were going to end up in this situation? Back, rewind a few months, not 2 weeks. Okay, a few months, a year, 2 years. Did you think that we would end up in this location right now?
You can rewind 6 years all the way up to the day of the ruling, and I did not think this would happen this way.
Yeah, I don't think anyone did.
Yeah, I would be surprised. Like, it seems really odd. It's a single judge. I haven't read the ruling fully in detail. I've only read snippets of it. It's a very long thing, and I didn't have time to go through it, frankly. But I didn't see a lot of like legal precedents being quoted, at least in the summary. I'm sure in the body there is some, but I'm very curious to hear as lawyers review this and dig into this, what the process is and if this is like valid or not, because it might be easy to win on appeal, but I think it goes to SCOTUS at this point.
Okay, let's go there. Um, what do you think is the probability of this decision surviving as is through the appeals court, Delaware Supreme Court, and then SCOTUS?
I would I could be completely wrong again, right? Like I didn't expect this to happen in the first place, but I would bet that it does not survive SCOTUS because it sets a crazy precedent that company like the precedent won't be super fine grained to you can't put up things if somebody has some kind of relationship with the CEO. It would end up being like all shareholders across all companies can now go and sue for things that the board may have approved if they can show that the board is quote unquote too close to the CEO or too friendly to the CEO. How do you define that legally? Like, why would CEOs pick board members they don't think are good? And why would board members agree to be on a board where they don't think the CEO is someone they admire?
Um, is that the only reason the judge ruled against?
From my
Ruled the way
understanding,
that she did is the only reason it was advertised wrong, in the wrong way, and there were some independence issues with board members, which everyone knows that. Is
yeah, I
that the
think
only reason?
I again, I don't want to say that is the only reason, but from everything I've seen so far, that seems to be the main thing that people are pointing at is that the board did not make shareholders aware enough. And I think the second implication is that the proposal that was put towards the shareholders was too favorable towards Elon, and the board's job was to negotiate more rigorously to get a better compensation plan, and somehow they didn't do their job or something along those lines. But
Right. That
that's
said, that
hard.
that last part is nobody talking about. No one.
Yeah,
There are thousands posts, videos on this thing, and that last part you said, no one's talking about.
correct. Maybe that may be the case, but that is the implication, right?
Yeah. So how do you fix that? I think. Yeah. I don't know.
I
It's.
would argue that
Mhm.
the precedent should be that shareholders voted for it, and you can go back in time and you can see clearly there were people who said, like yourself, this is not good. Here's the numbers why. There's media coverage about it. And kind of like we assume that if it's been in the public domain, an informed shareholder's responsibility is to get informed on their own, right? That's just generally been the precedent. So if you can argue that that information is out there, then I don't think the amount of compensation should be the issue. If you can show that there was press conversations about the closeness of the board, again, that shouldn't really be an issue. So you could argue that the shareholders had every right to turn down that plan, and then another plan would have been proposed. The assumption that if the shareholders turned down that plan, Elon would leave is implying that no other plan that was proposed would have been satisfactory to Elon, in which case he's not an indentured servant. He has every right to say, it's this or I leave, and shareholders vote.
All right, let's talk about that hypothetical, if you don't mind, because I'm curious about your views on this. So let's say, for example, that they go back to the drawing board, they come up with a plan that Elon doesn't like. Let's say they remove a zero, just to keep it simple. What do you think Elon does at that point?
That's a great,
I don't.
yeah.
This is a good question. I don't want you to answer it
Yeah, I was gonna,
because
that's a very big
yeah,
hypothetical. It's hard to say.
yeah, because the reason is because it's like this is getting into some legal issue right now, and I really don't want to part of it,
If,
honestly.
if you're honest, if you honestly ask me what happens in that scenario, and I'm happy to answer it this way. I imagine Elon is not the type to fight, to let go of a fight when he thinks it's unjust, even if that means going to the grave fighting, which means
Yeah,
he
but
would probably fight to change the board, move it from a different state, do other
there's a
things.
difference between going to the grave versus taking Tesla to the grave.
This is true, but I don't think his fight would take Tesla to the grave. The stock might go to the grave, but I don't think the company would go to the grave. The company's going to operate just fine. And remember, he's already once in history, per his own how he describes it, not pursued going private because all the shareholders wanted it that way. Um, whether that's true or not, I'm not going to get into that. But at least the way he says that, if he does believe that was the case, then he might have more hardened beliefs to not do it again. It
If
being
the ruling
tickets.
stays and they go back to the drawing board, come up with a plan that they believe would pass, and Elon doesn't like it, what's the probability of him leaving, do you think?
I think it's pretty high at that point. But before that, I would say
Wow.
he can't change the board. He can't change the state. He can't get the approval plan that he wants. The United States Supreme Court doesn't vote to repeal this. So there's like four big things I think have to happen at a minimum, and he might think of like a fifth or sixth that I haven't thought of.
Right. Right.
Like I heard another proposal, which is Tesla could create a holding company. In that holding company, they could move all the AI assets, and Elon could get a bigger share of that holding company. That might be another way.
Okay. Yeah, I think we talked about that, right?
We talked about a holding company owning Tesla, but I hadn't thought about the fact that you could actually have Tesla own the holding company.
No, I think that's exactly what we talked about. The ladder.
Oh yeah. When we compared it with the way DeepMind has that lab, yeah, you're right.
Right. Right.
But
I'm really
I think it comes
curious.
down
I'm
to how much of this is
curious.
about money and how much of this is about control. Because there was that one email that surfaced where Elon explained to one of the board members that the reason why he wanted to be able to achieve such a large compensation plan, given a difficult goal, was that he wants to be able to, do the whole Mars thing. So I think it's not a bad thing for like him to be able to go to the board and say, "Hey, look, I want to be compensated this much. What do I need to do to achieve that?" And they come up with something that is impossibly hard. So the amount of the compensation shouldn't be the issue. the question should be, was the achievement not considered hard enough? And I would argue at the time, even if you and I differ on it, many people thought it was impossible.
Okay. Ken says in the reply, this cannot go to SCOTUS. It can only go to Delaware Supreme Court. That's interesting. I wonder why.
Maybe it goes to SCOTUS after Delaware Supreme Court.
Or he says it can't go to SCOTUS. He says it can only go to Delaware Supreme Court. Ken Jacobs Esquire.
Maybe
I
that's
don't know
true.
why.
I thought everything could go up to Supreme Court, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, obviously nothing we say in here. Neither of us are legal experts. I have no fucking clue what's going on.
Yeah, there's some YouTube
The only thing
channels.
the only thing I care about I think the only thing that really is, would Elon leave or not? Like that's really the essence of the Tesla investor type of perspective. You know, would Elon leave? If he stayed, would he check out? And obviously, like quiet quit counts as leaving. And so I guess we'll find out. I think the time will tell. Everybody has their opinion.
I think it's going to be impossibly hard for a judge to say that there's no path that Elon can possibly get to 25%, right? That's not what the ruling says. The ruling says the path that they took was not correct because of a few technicalities. So, unless we're about to have a country where we say that founders can never own a certain percentage of companies when there's a bunch of founders that own larger percentage of those companies, or that if a company gets too big, the founder can't have it. Like these would have to be passed through laws, I think, not through judgments. So, unless something like that is going to happen, I think technically there's some path for him to still get what he wants. And the only reason why I think he would leave is if the board or the shareholders didn't support him in what he felt was necessary. Because like right now, I don't think he's pissed at the board or the shareholders. I think he's pissed at the judges.
Right. Right. But he's very focused on it. So if it was as easy as you're saying, which is, there's a way, appeals courts, they can reincorporate, there's a law holding company. If it was that easy, I don't think Elon would be this vocal about it.
Well, I'm not saying it's easy. I think all of those things are going to involve a lot of unnecessary complexity. And then there's a potential that the new state decides to do some new ruling. I think it also has crazy tax implications if he has to do a new
Right.
plan. So there's a whole bunch of reasons for him to be pissed, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly.
Like I strongly believe the ISO implications are huge here because the tax implications on them are huge.
Can you describe that again, please?
Sure. There's two types of options you receive. There's an incentive stock option and there's a non-qualified stock option. The incentive stock options are capped at a certain amount you're allowed to grant to anybody. And I don't know what the limits are for CEOs, like somebody else who knows this better, or somebody who's using a chatbot can probably figure this out and tell us. But like there are limits on how much you can give per year. However, that limit applies to the grant price, I believe, not the vest price. So when they granted this to him in 2018, at that time, you look back at the stock and where it was and the strike price, that was his, like we're talking about, I think right now it'd be like 30s or 40s compared to where we are today. So we're talking about like a 10x increase. So his tax liabilities would be on 10%, not on 100%. And today, if he was given those same options, his strike price would be where it is today. And the nefarious thing about like a non-qualified stock option is if the stock doesn't go up 50%, he's better off receiving stock than receiving options because you only get paid for how much the stock goes up. You don't get paid for where it's at. The 50% comes from if you're doing a 3-to-1 ratio. If you're getting 3 times as many options as stock.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else you want to talk about this one? About this topic? Sounds
No.
like it's this gonna last for a year plus. Sounds like.
Yeah, I don't like if it took 6 years for the court to figure this out, like I'm just curious, why did it take 6 years? Was like information hard to come by? Was there stalling tactics happening? Did somebody have like I don't know, like why does it take so long for a case to be heard?
Yeah, I don't know. Ken says, I asked him why this can't go to SCOTUS. Ken says it doesn't meet the requirements for SCOTUS. It's not a federal question, nor are any circuit courts split on the issue. There you go. Thank you, Ken. If this is correct, and that's very valuable information. I'm really curious how it's going to play out. Very curious.
All right, I'm gonna ask a really terrible devil's advocate question if you're ready for
Oh,
that.
God. Don't put me on the spot. People fucking hate this. I mean, I hate this topic. I fucking hate this topic.
All right,
I
fine, I
hate
won't
it.
ask.
I hate it. People get so fucking emotional. There's an insane echo chamber. Insane. I mean, if you thought there was an echo chamber 5 years ago when this was being discussed, 6 years ago, the echo chamber today is a million times worse. You open your mouth one word, but the fact is, here's the fact. I will tell you this. After our conversation yesterday, I looked into a little bit more. I didn't read the whole opinion because who the fuck has time for that? But I read a few other things, and as I'm reading it, I'm like, holy shit, this is basically if you took my posts from 2018 on Tesla Motors Club, fed it into a LLM, and spit out a summary, this is what would read up. Every single issue I raised in early 2018 in those posts is another opinion. I'm not saying that's the correct decision, okay? I've come around on certain things a little bit more since then, but they do appear. The 3 points I raised do appear in the opinion. And if there was no echo chamber at the time, if people paid a little bit more attention to these things, yeah, we wouldn't be in this situation. We probably would not be in this situation right now. And what's happening 6 years later? An echo chamber is a million times worse. So I think it's very likely that we're going to end up in this situation again.
So, do you mind sharing that post again in some form or factor so I can read it?
Yeah, I can DM. I mean, there's a bunch of them. There's a whole discussion, and yeah, it was.
The reason why I ask is because I'm trying to understand I mean, maybe you could just answer this. Was the tenor of your posts, we should not do this plan? Or was the tenor of your posts, if we are going to do this plan, we need to add some kind of disclosures around the following things?
I don't think independence of the board is a critical issue here. I don't like having an independent board is important. At least some independent members is important. I think having family members on the board it doesn't look good in a situation like this. But fundamentally, it's not like you can't have a family member on the board clearly. But I don't think that's a central issue here. I think the central issue is, and this plays against him a little bit. The central issue is, would he have walked if you gave him one less zero? If you gave him one fewer zero, would he have walked? In my opinion, the answer to that question is no. I don't think he would have walked. I think that he truly cares about the mission. I think that he does want to make the world transition the world to sustainable energy. And I think that he would do it for less money. Okay. And so that puts him in a difficult position because now you can't, you can't threaten the other side saying, I'm going to walk because you truly care. And in that situation, the board, even if they want to give you more money, technically they should be representing the investors. And that means, getting more with less on every front, whether from your suppliers, customers, etc., raw materials and all that, including the compensation of the employees. So that's the central issue that no one is talking about.
So let me ask you a question. Do you think if they offered one less zero, Elon would have achieved the same timeline in the same
Yes.
objectives in the same timeline?
Yeah, but let me caveat that I have never met Elon. Okay. I don't know him personally. One less bit, I have no idea if what I'm saying is correct. But I think that he would have. I don't think money is a motivator for him. But at the same time, I don't know. So, and we're never gonna know the answer to that question, right? But I don't know, like if I'm putting myself in his shoes and I'm like, if I truly deeply care about these issues that I'm trying to solve, there's no fucking way I'm gonna work from Tesla. And on the other hand, I totally understand all the investors, retail investors especially, who care about Elon and they want to give him more money. And I understand the board wants to give him more money. But it's a bit of a, tricky situation.
Yeah, I think if you're an average shareholder, there's not a lot of places where you can find a executive who is so strongly aligned with the shareholders' incentives. So that part is extremely attractive. For me, when I saw his compensation plan, that was one of the core reasons why I took a big position in Tesla, right? Because it clearly showed I'm going to march in the same direction as you. And I would argue, even for employees that work there, it's a big incentive to say, you're getting salary. I'm not getting paid unless we hit these goals. Look at the opposite of like Amari Barra, who's getting
But
paid
see,
to
but
just keep the lights on.
so that is the common, perspective right now out on X. Okay, people are like, he wouldn't have gotten paid if they didn't achieve the goals. But that still doesn't answer the central question, the central issue that I just said. Would he have walked with one fewer zero? Because one fewer zero would have mean tens of billions of dollars, maybe not hundreds of billions of dollars, his net worth at the end of the day, right?
That's correct, but I would
So you can
argue.
still say, with a one fewer zero, you can still say, he's aligned with the investors. I invested because he's aligned. He can say to people he would work hard, etc., etc. All of that's still true. So you're not answering the question, and
No,
that's
no,
literally what
you're
everyone is
correct.
doing.
You're correct. The argument of could they have kept the structure the same, done everything the same, but the amount of the reward have been changed is a valid question. I think that's the
Yeah,
core of the issue.
exactly. Exactly. And the only place I saw that is one sentence in the Reuters article. Nowhere else did I see that issue addressed or brought up.
For what it's worth, I
Ever?
brought it up here, right?
I'll take your word for it. Machine.
I want to know if you know or anyone in the audience knows the dates, approximate dates of when that compensation plan was finalized. Because I'm trying to go through the Tesla Motors Club forum, and your posts. There's so many posts. That's just like hot garbage spewed over everywhere. So I need to get more specific dates.
It was early 2018, if I remember correctly, when it first came up. Because I remember because what was going through my mind is like, oh my gosh, we just went through an insane Model 3 ramp that did not pan out as predicted, and now we're talking about tens of billions of dollars of compensation. That makes no fucking sense. That's what was going through my mind at the time. So it's got to be early 2018.
You literally had a post. Never mind.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them. So I'll try to find them and send it to group, and we can talk about them next time. You can bring it up, Machine. Go ahead.
I mean, you have posts such as claiming that Tesla in 2019 was going to switch all the batteries in all the cars at the same time. You had a Twitter post.
All right, so hold on. Are you talking about compensation posts or other stuff? Because we
Other
can
stuff.
go
See,
through a
that's what
whole
I'm saying.
laundry of
Let me go
stuff
through
that people have
compensation.
said. Dude, if you've been around any topic for as long as I have, you have, Elon has, you can't pick and choose. Don't do the fucking legacy media bullshit in here. Okay? So just go back. What a waste of time.
Yep. it's impossible to talk on a topic and be correct 100% of the time. That's an unfair standard.
Yeah. I thought he was going to bring up something relevant. They're going to find a way, right? I mean, they're going to find a way to give him the original money.
Let me see if I can argue a different approach. I'm going to try and play devil's advocate that the board may have actually tried their hardest, if you're comfortable with that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying this is my position. I want to make that clear. I'm just going to try and play devil's advocate here.
Okay.
Let's say you're Elon. You just saw your entire net worth almost evaporate when you're doing SpaceX and Tesla.
But that's not true, right? We're talking a quarter of the net worth, right?
No. Back when SpaceX and Tesla were, there was a moment, I think it was like 2001 or so, where both when they launched the fourth rocket, and he almost
Oh, I got
totally
you.
went under.
Yeah.
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 So you've had this experience, and in your mind, you know now the value of money. I'm not saying he's obsessed with money because he wants it for luxurious reasons. I'm saying he understands the value of money in terms of buying stability and security, and he thinks he needs a lot of it to do what he wants to do at SpaceX. It's possible he goes to them and says, if I don't have a large compensation plan, I'm going to have to leave because I'm going to have to find a different way to make this money.
Right. Yeah.
He may prioritize the space mission more than renewable energy.
So you're saying that Elon might go out there and say, I need hundreds of billions of dollars to make my dream on SpaceX come true. And if Tesla isn't going to give it to me, then I'll walk. Not because I don't care about Tesla, not because I don't care about transitioning the world system of energy, but because this has to happen. And so I have to make this hard decision.
He may have also said, I'm the only person who can make this happen. So, like, if you think you can get someone else to do it for cheaper, go ahead and do that. But if you're going to drop a zero, I'm not the one taking the plan. You got to find someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we weren't in the room. We don't know how hard those negotiations went.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see the email from Elon explaining why he wanted the money?
You just referenced it, and I've read references to it in articles and stuff, but I haven't seen the email. I didn't follow this case very closely, or at all, actually. Like I said, it's not really a topic I want to focus on.
If you want, I can just read you as one paragraph.
Go ahead.
He said, the added comp is just so that I can put as much as possible towards minimizing existential risk by putting the money towards Mars. If I am successful in leading Tesla to be one of the world's most valuable companies, this is kind of crazy, but it is true. Hope it isn't misinterpreted. The title of it was Re My Comp Stuff.
Yeah, I remember seeing that part.
So
Okay, so I
that to
mean,
me suggests there was at least some conversation happening and some pushback. It wasn't zero.
no, I don't think anyone's claiming zero.
Well, the judge is claiming that the board should have done a better job. Arguably, they've seen the material of the conversations.
Well, yeah, there's a difference between zero versus a convincing job. Okay, so let me ask you this. So let's say you are the board member, or let's say, okay, gosh, I really don't want to talk about this. I have nothing to gain out of this conversation. Zero.
All
And
right,
I have everything to
we
lose.
can call it a day.
Thanks. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. I will talk to you next time.